Ready to hit the pause button on your parenting fails? Ready to feel better about your parenting? Welcome to Parenting Pause, the podcast, where all of you is welcome. Enjoy our new format, offering you weekly inspirations to support you in being the parent you want to be. I'm Leslie Potter, the founder of the Pure Joy Way, a mother, a parent coach, and a fellow traveler on this journey to wake up in our parenting. And I believe together we can make this a better world for ourselves and our kiddo. Hello, lovies. Let's talk today about emotional safety in the Pure Joy model and why setting our personal boundaries is more emotionally safe for our children than enforcing boundaries and limits on them so that we feel emotionally safe. So most of us were actually taught how to not take responsibility for our emotional safety. What happened was when we tried to say no or to set a personal boundary for ourselves, as children, we often behaved in ways that triggered our caregivers. And so we might have been labeled as mean or rude or bad or wrong, right? And of course, no, none of us wanted to carry those labels around or have love withdrawn, which is what happened. So we began to abandon our personal boundaries out of the fear of losing that love that we so desperately needed. So as a parent, when you set a personal boundary, you may start to feel selfish abandoning and rejecting of your child. And if you aren't willing to feel those intense feelings, right, instead of taking care of your emotional safety by setting a personal boundary, you may project those feelings onto your child, and then maybe you're going to want to limit or bind them so you don't have to feel those intense feelings. Now, I want you to pause for a second, and can you see how this is not a safe, emotionally safe for our children? Because in a way, we're blaming them for those feelings that arise for us, and instead of turning back in and taking responsibility for those feelings and learning to tolerate them. And that's why I created the SafeSeat process that I teach in my work, especially in the foundational course of Parenting Paused. We go through that deep learning of the SafeSeat process because it's so critical for us to go back in and be able to build our capacity to tolerate more intense feelings that as children we learn to repress. Because of course, as I say, we didn't want to be labeled as rude or mean or bad or any of those things. So let's talk about boundaries a little bit, personal boundaries, because if you're confused about it, how your personal boundaries, setting your personal boundary is different than binding your child, you're not alone. I mean, this is a really difficult one. And everybody I work with they have a hard time with this because they've heard all this parenting advice that says children need limits and boundaries. And I like to say to people, well, children will be limited and bound if you set your healthy personal boundary. But unfortunately, when I read this information or I heard it, it kind of gave me permission to bind and limit my child. And fortunately, it didn't work with my daughter, which a lot of the traditional parenting didn't. So I had to dig a lot deeper, and I had to ask myself, why was I so comfortable limiting her and her behavior, but uncomfortable setting my personal boundaries? Now, that was a big, big question. And what I found is that I, was very identified with being seen as the loving, giving, generous one in our relationship, right? Now, the problem was to balance things out, she had to be the location of the unlovable, selfish, demanding one. So of course I wanted to limit her because of the feelings that arose in me when I perceived those traits in her, which I had learned to not like, right? And the truth was, because I'd been trained to reject those traits in myself by being bound as a child if I exhibited them. Then, of course, this was all I knew to do with my daughter. This was where I talk a lot about that family template passes down if we don't deeply inquire and question. And so I found that I was literally terrified of setting a personal boundary because of what it might mean to our relationship. I mean, I was really scared that she was going to feel rejected and abandoned and unsupported. I mean, you may feel this too, right? And I didn't think I could tolerate those feelings. And yet, when I began to save seat and recognize those were just feelings, that feelings aren't dangerous, they're not who I am. They were just feelings. I wasn't selfish, abandoning, and rejecting. I was setting a healthy personal boundary for myself, which I hadn't learned to do because I had been taught to take care of others, to love others, to do all these things for others, but I hadn't learned to do that for myself. So I slowly began to take these little baby steps toward owning what I was willing to offer in the relationship. Now, you're probably wondering on a practical level what that looks like. Yes, I know I was. So what it looks like now is when my daughter asks me for something, and instead of saying an immediate yes or no, I take a little pause and I notice what's coming up inside me, like what stories are arising. And if the story is, I think she's being demanding or she's wanting too much, I immediately, want to bind her and get her to stop asking for things. But if I really slow down and if I turn inside, I realize I really don't want to offer to her what she's asking for. And oh my God, all those feelings of feeling selfish and rejecting and abandoning, they come up because I could offer it and yet I don't want to. So I learned instead of binding her, I'll often say something like, good for you for asking, and this is what I'm offering. Because I always have something to offer, just usually not the whole thing that she wants, right? So if I can take responsibility for honestly, truthfully, generously what I want to offer, then I don't need to bind her or get her not to ask me, or to see her as entitled or demanding, because I'm so willing to take care of my own emotional needs. So that's a little bit today. We'll go into this a little bit deeper on other podcasts, but I just wanted to share that with you. And one of the ways that we do this, again, like you're going to learn more and more if you hang out here about the SafeSeat process. And the SafeSeat process teaches you how to go inside and be able to grow up more and more and become emotionally safe for your children. That was really what I wanted to do more than anything. But I had to learn how to grow myself up. And that was a little shocking. But when I did, let me tell you, miracles began to happen. All right, lovies, thanks for joining. Make sure to check out the free foundational course to learn the SafeSeat process at purejoyparenting.com. While there, sign up on the offerings page to get more info on the Parenting Pause course I'll be leading in October.